Hi everyone, this is meteorologist Brian Bennett. Of course, all eyes are on Hurricane Irma. Right now it's a Category 3 hurricane, still 2,000 miles away from the United States, so there is some uncertainty in the path, but let's see if we can go ahead and answer a few of the questions about where it might be heading over the next week or so. Right now, winds are 120 miles per hour. Unfortunately, this right here, in fact, let me circle that. This is not what we want to see right here. We don't want to see any southwest movement of the storm, but it is moving to the west-southwest, so that means it's going to bring it closer to the islands, to the Leeward Islands, to Puerto Rico, to Dominican Republic, and even potentially have more of an impact on Florida if we continue to see that west-southwest movement. We want to see a northeasterly movement to take it away from land. But right now, it is moving to the west-southwest at 14 miles per hour. 14 miles per hour, not a bad speed. That means that it won't stay over one location for too long and dump a ton of rain like we saw with Harvey. So this is a different type of storm than Harvey. This one potentially has more of a wind impact and more of a storm surge impact as well than what we saw with Harvey. All right, taking a look at the satellite imagery. Last night we had what's called an eye wall replacement cycle that happens when a hurricane is strengthening. And so today we have a very concentric, healthy looking eye and a nice looking eye wall as well. So it's a very healthy looking storm. And I believe it's actually going to become even more pronounced or stronger as it continues to move westward. There are really three factors that impact the strength of a hurricane. One, the water temperature. Two, how much water vapor is in the air. And three, how much wind shear there is. And of course, whether it's moving over land has a big impact on it as well. But notice that we're going from the yellows here, which are temperatures in the upper 20s degrees Celsius. We're moving into warmer water. So hurricanes are fueled by warm water. So as we move farther west, warmer water potentially means a stronger storm. Here's a look at the wind shear. And wind shear can tear apart a storm, but here's Irma right here. And as we go westward towards Florida or Cuba or the islands or anywhere in the United States here, we're looking at a low wind shear environment. That means the hurricane should continue to be able to at least maintain its Category 3 status. Here's a look at the water vapor imagery. Again, dry air can really destroy a hurricane. The dry air is represented by the kind of the brown color here, and whenever you see the brown color being pulled into the center of a hurricane, that can dry it out and really weaken the storm. In this case, we're actually looking at a fairly moist environment, not only over the Leeward Islands, but all the way to Florida. We have plenty of moisture to deal with, and no signs of really dry air being pulled into the storm at this point. So with this type of environment, I'm not too surprised to see that the spaghetti plots are calling for this Category 3 hurricane to become a Category 4 hurricane. So that's very possible over the next 24 hours. Right now, winds are 120. A Cat 4 hurricane has winds of 130 miles per hour. So I think we will see the storm continue to increase in intensity. Right now, we do have hurricane watches, of course, out in effect for the Leeward Islands. I think we'll see hurricane watches issued for Puerto Rico over the next 24 hours. I'm actually kind of surprised they're not in effect quite yet with this massive storm looming and starting to head more that direction. And if you've been watching this storm, you've noticed that we've started to see a more and more southerly track. When we were first talking about Irma, the National Hurricane Center had a track that was a bit farther north, but with each model run, we're starting to see the track go farther and farther south. That's due to a high pressure located up here around Bermuda, and apparently it's stronger than what the models initially thought. So that high pressure is actually helping to push the storm farther to the south. And again, any farther south movement is not a good thing because it brings it, one, closer to all these Caribbean islands, and also means that it doesn't have time to recurve to the north, which means a greater possibility of an impact on Florida. But again, this is the National Hurricane Center official track, and right now they do have it moving over the northern Leeward Islands. Very close to Puerto Rico, going to be a close call. Same thing with Dominican Republic. Of course, we know Haiti doesn't have the greatest infrastructure for hurricanes, so way too close for comfort for these guys. making a direct landfall in the Bahamas and possibly very close, if not making a landfall, in Cuba. Cuba has a very rugged terrain and can actually help to weaken a storm. So if it does move over Cuba, it would actually weaken it a little bit before it makes that turn to the north, possibly towards Florida. So many factors in place. Here's a look at these spaghetti model plots, and we're in pretty good agreement all the way out to roughly the Bahamas. The more trusty models here, if you can see this on your cell phone or your computer screen, would be, of course, the UK Met, which is the blue line here. This is a very good hurricane model. Also, the red line is the National Hurricane Center. Very good folks down there at the Hurricane Center in Miami. And the yellow line represented by the CMC, or the Canadian model, with the triangles here, is a very good model as well. So you can see that we're looking at basic range of the more trusty models of this general vicinity right here once we move towards Puerto Rico and parts of Dominican Republic. And then once we get a bit farther, the range spreads a little bit, but we're still looking at a basic range in this area right here. So obviously uncertainty increases a little bit as you head farther west, and the stronger that high pressure is, the longer the storm takes to move past it, the harder it is going to be to recurve to the north. Let's take a look at the RPM model. The RPM only goes out 72 hours, but this can kind of give us a good idea of how things will be trending over the next 3 days. This is a precipitation. And as you can see, the storm moves westward. Here are the Leeward Islands. Again, maybe kind of hard to see on your phone, but the storm impacting the northern Leeward Islands, possibly making landfall. Here's Puerto Rico right here. The storm very, very close to Puerto Rico. Let's hope that it stays just north of Puerto Rico, because even that 80-mile difference can make the biggest difference in the amount of winds seen in the small island of Puerto Rico. And then again, that storm likely to continue its westerly progression. That is rainfall. Here's a look at wind, and whenever you see the little red blip there, that actually indicates a Cat 4 hurricane. So the RPM agrees with kind of what I'm thinking as well, that we could see a Cat 4 hurricane by the time it moves towards the Leeward Islands. Notice how close the hurricane force winds are to Puerto Rico. So I think on Puerto Rico, Tuesday night and Wednesday, we could see winds blowing hurricane force, especially on the North Shore. Remember, winds rotate counterclockwise around a hurricane, so ahead of that storm on Tuesday night, we're going to have very large surf and some storm surge possibility on the North Shore of Puerto Rico. And also with the mountainous terrain over Puerto Rico, we're going to see possibility for some flash flooding as the storm moves over. Again, it is moving much faster than Harvey. I don't think we're going to see another storm that drops 52 inches of rain, but as you know, with any tropical system, we can see a lot of rain in a short amount of time period. In fact, here's a look at the RPM rainfall forecast. I know this looks kind of hypnotic, but basically just check out the purples and even some whites here. And this is the center of Harvey, and as it moves westward, you can see how heavy the rain is right around the center of circulation, but you head away from that center of circulation and the rainfall rates just dramatically decrease. So the exact path that Irma ends up taking will determine whether a location sees 15 inches of rain or they see maybe 3 to 4 inches of rain. Right now, the RPM has a storm barely skirting the northern part of Puerto Rico, so Puerto Rico could see some very hefty rain again Tuesday night and then to Wednesday. So folks in Puerto Rico, you should definitely watch out for the potential of flash flooding, especially with your mountainous terrain and some of those downslope winds kind of causing some of the rain to intensify and lead to flash flooding. Here's the European model. This is a very trusty model when it comes to hurricane prediction. The European model does a great job with predicting high latitude, high and low pressures, and really the storm is being driven by where these high pressure systems are located. So as I mentioned the other day, high pressures are almost like, you can envision them being almost like cones, humongous cones in the middle of the street that you want to drive around. And this is basically what the storm is doing. It's driving right along in the Atlantic and the Caribbean, and it wants to avoid these big huge cones represented by the orange color here. So with the high pressure in this location, the storm is going to want to go to the west around that high pressure. If this high pressure were to erode some, then it would allow the storm to recurve to the north a bit more. And to complicate factors more, Now we're looking at another high pressure moving in, which this could actually be bad news for the Carolinas. If this high pressure moves in, it's actually going to block the storm from making that recurve to the north. It could actually make more of a recurve to the northwest, possibly into the Carolinas. So that's something I'm going to have to watch very closely. Here's a look at the latest European model run. This is the 0Z model run from yesterday evening. And you can see by Wednesday evening, the European has a storm very close to Puerto Rico, the eye being just to the north of the island. Let's hope that the eye stays north of the island. As we saw with the rainfall and with the wind, that 80-mile difference can make a huge difference in the amount of wind, waves, and rain that the islands see. Same thing goes for Dominican Republic and Haiti as we head into, this is Thursday evening. Here we are on Friday evening. The European has a storm moving over very northern Cuba and making a direct landfall in the Bahamas. So folks in the Bahamas should definitely be buckling down. Remember that counterclockwise circulation. So if you're on the northern side of the storm, you're more likely to see a larger storm surge, larger waves, and also we have more tornadoes on the northern quadrant of the storm as well. So not a good forecast for the Bahamas. You should go ahead and be planning for very strong hurricane conditions in the Bahamas by Friday or so. Even with some room in the path of the storm, Bahamas is not looking great for you guys right now. Here we are on Saturday evening. The European has a storm in very northern Cuba. And then we start to see the recurve finally. That high pressure from the north starts to edge in. The high pressure in the Atlantic starts to weaken a little bit, allowing the storm to recurve. But nonetheless, based on this current model run, the storm would impact the Miami area and would impact Florida based on this particular model run. But the high pressure is strong enough to keep pushing it just enough where it's not really making too much of an intense landfall in Florida. Let's hope that continues. We want that high pressure to push the storm out to sea. We want this high pressure here to weaken so the storm can move off to the northeast. But again, what's happening now, and the European is picking up on, the American model actually picked up on yesterday evening, is that this high pressure is actually going to act as a blocking high. And what that does is it doesn't allow the storm to recurve out to sea like we would normally see. Instead, it blocks the storm. And what that does is forces it to move to the northwest, potentially into the Carolinas. So not only are we looking at a very close possible landfall in the Caribbean islands, but we're looking at a possibility for a landfall in Florida, but also this storm could actually make a second landfall into the Carolinas, or at least continue to make that northwesterly curve. If it moves over the spine of Florida, it could continue to curve to the north-northwest, bringing it over Georgia. So we do not like to have these blocking highs when it deals with hurricanes, as they do prevent that northeasterly turn that we would like to see, which would drag it more out to sea. And again, the European is now picking up on that. The American model is picking up on it as well. So not great news to see this blocking high here. All right, so that's the European model run. Here is the American model run. And let me slide this over a little bit so you can see it a bit better. Alright, so you can see Irma pretty clearly here. This is Wednesday afternoon, and the GFS, the American model, bringing it very, very, very close to Puerto Rico, and keeping the center of circulation north of the island of Puerto Rico, but still way too close to the point that we would likely be seeing hurricane force winds and very large surf in Puerto Rico, and same thing goes for Dominican Republic and even Haiti as well. All models at this point are bringing us a direct landfall in the Bahamas. So the Bahamas should definitely be preparing for a hurricane, if not a very strong major hurricane, as we head into the latter part of the week. Here's the GFS model as we go into the future. This is Friday evening, possibly again impacting Cuba, very similar to what the European had, and then starting to make that turn to the north. But notice that the GFS, the American model, has a stronger blocking high to the north, and typically I would trust the European model with these high latitude, high pressure systems, but got to give it to the GFS. It picked up on this blocking high yesterday, and as long as that blocking high is there, it's going to force the storm to go farther west than it would like to go initially. So the GFS is suggesting that we could have a Florida Keys or southern Florida landfall on next Sunday night and into Monday. And with that strong blocking high, we could actually see pretty rough conditions even as far west in Florida as the Tampa Bay area. So Tampa Bay definitely not out of the woods with this storm. As if this blocking high does remain strong, it could push the storm far enough west that Tampa Bay area would see possibly hurricane conditions from the storm as we move towards later next weekend and even into the September 10th and 11th period. The good news right here would be, again, the wind's rotating counterclockwise. This would be an offshore wind. One of the biggest threats in the Tampa Bay area and Fort Myers would be the storm surge. So we like to see winds that are blowing offshore. So right now, when the storm starts to move onshore, the winds will be blowing from the east, which again would be very strong winds, but it would be an offshore wind. On the bottom part of the hurricane, right here, if this scenario were to play out, then we would see onshore winds for the Keys and for southern Fort Myers and Naples area as the storm starts to progress to the north, and you get that counterclockwise circulation, and that's when you'd have to start watching out for the storm surge threat. So the GFS scenario is really kind of a worst case scenario right now for the state of Florida, as it brings it up the spine of the state, basically impacting the entire state. So hopefully we'll see some wiggling here. I would like to see the storm head more to the northeast, but the possibilities and scenarios are starting to look a bit more ominous with this storm. And again, without blocking high, notice how the storm wants to go off to the north and even the northwest. So if that blocking high does come true, then we're looking at a more ominous scenario, and then even bringing heavy rain as far north as Tennessee. So this is a long, long way off. No reason to freak out or even flood your fridge with milk and bread and all that quite yet, but this is definitely a storm that we're going to want to keep an eye on. Always a good idea to have a hurricane plan in place. That includes batteries. That includes thinking about where you can go to a safer location, especially if you live along the coast. So having your hurricane plan ready to go is a great idea at this point. Again, no need to really freak out quite yet. It's still 10 miles away, or excuse me, 2,000 miles away, much more than 10 miles, fortunately. So still a lot of uncertainty in the track. I'm hoping that it makes more of a Hurricane Matthew type of track. I know this did bring a lot of storm surge flooding to parts of Georgia and the Carolinas, but at this point we can actually only hope for the recurve of the storm and hope that it makes more of a turn out to sea, which would really minimize the wind damage that would potentially occur in parts of the East Coast. All right, so here's a look at Google Maps, and I wanted to show kind of the possible scenarios here. Let me turn on my Telestrator here. All right, so here's the storm basically right now, okay? So this is where Irma is. And the farthest north track possibility that we're looking at right now would be one that takes it close to the Leeward Islands, close to Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, unfortunately making a direct landfall close to the Turks and Caicos and the Bahamas, and then recurves to the north. Again, that blocking high could actually force it to go back inland. If that blocking high doesn't materialize or isn't as strong, then we would see more of a northeasterly turn. All right, so this is kind of the farthest north path that would be a possibility at this point. All right, the farthest south pass would be one that takes it over the island of Puerto Rico, over the Dominican, over the socioeconomically struggling area of Haiti with poor infrastructure. It can't handle hurricanes quite as well as some of the other islands, and then starts to make that recurve to the north, going over Cuba, and even somebody as far as maybe the Florida Panhandle wouldn't be safe from this storm on the far southern path. So that's the far southern path. The more likely path at this point, based on the current models, would be one that takes it just barely north of Puerto Rico, just north of Dominican Republic and Haiti, making a direct landfall in the Bahamas, and then scraping the east coast of Florida, and then making a possibly a northwest turn if that blocking high comes true. So you can see either way, this is going to be a storm that we're going to need to watch as we head towards next weekend. Go ahead and have that hurricane plan in place in case things do take a turn for the west. We will hope for the recurve to the north, and if so, that'll be great news with very little impact as far as hurricane damage on land. We would see, of course, some storm surge on the east coast and large surf as well, but it would wouldn't be nearly as bad as if this storm happens to track right over Florida like the GFS model is wanting to do. Obviously, we don't want this storm to go into the Gulf, as it would allow it to continue to maintain its strength with the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico, and we don't want to see any winds out of the southwest anywhere near Tampa Bay, as that would increase the storm surge likelihood. And also, this storm is a strong one. It's going to be a Cat 4 hurricane, so very strong winds as well. So we don't want to see any of those type of winds anywhere near Florida. All right, guys. Well, that's the latest of what we're looking at right now with the storm. Again, no reason to really freak out or worry too much right now. Just have that plan in place. That's my suggestion at this point. We'll continue to watch this hurricane, hope for the best, hope that it doesn't strengthen anymore, and then it makes a recurve out to sea. All right, that's today's update. If you have any questions, feel free to zip me a line, and hope you have a great and safe day.